In this video, we're going to take a look at the Conklin word gauge. So let's jump straight to the end with my thoughts on this pen. When I first got this pen, the nib wasn't any good. It didn't write no matter what ink I put into it, and I was really frustrated. And taking a close look at the nib, it had some problems. Now, a replacement nib unit was very inexpensive, so I just simply replaced the entire unit. And from that point, it wrote wonderfully. It really fits well in my hand. There's not a ton of feedback, which for a lot of people will be nice. I prefer it in its fine. I do have the OmniFlex that I use once in a blue moon, just for giggles and grins. Something that's very nice about this pen is that it is very easy to go from one nib to another and very inexpensive to do that. Now, I enjoy using this pen, and I do get a kick out of the gimmick being the gauge there telling me just how much I have left to write. So it's a gimmick, but it's kind of fun with that. There is one thing that I don't care for with this pen, and that is the very small piston knob. My hands, sometimes while cleaning, have a little bit of an issue because it's such a short knob. So that's the only bad thing, but that takes nothing from the writing experience. Now that we know how I feel about the Conklin word gauge, let's see how I got to that opinion, starting with the unboxing. The Conklin word gauge came in a box like this, which held a box like this. I like the packaging that they give. It's very utilitarian, but at the same time, it does look very nice. And I think when a pen gets to be over $100, that having a nice looking box that it comes in adds to the experience. Now, I know that most people making reviews say they don't care about the box, but I do. With the pen out of the box, we need to get to the nib. Now, to be honest, as long as it doesn't take 20 turns to uncap a pen, I'm fine. But how many turns does this pen take to get uncapped? The Conklin word gauge takes 1¼ turns to uncap. I don't think the turns to uncap are excessive, though I can say that my preference is towards 1 full turn to uncap. With that being said, this pen, I've never had an issue with it drying out if I let it sit for a week without using. I haven't tried it longer than a week, but it does a very good job at keeping the nib wet and ready to write. This gets us to the nib. This pen has a steel fine nib. I like that this pen has the crescent-shaped breather hole. I do appreciate when companies have something more than just the circle, something a little bit interesting to look at. And the black nib on this pen really does fit it aesthetically. Now, let's ink this pen up. The Conklin word gauge is a piston filler that holds approximately 1.5 milliliters of ink. The ink for today is Mnemosyne. 1.5 milliliters is plenty to get you through tons of writing. And I think that the gauge itself, being the gimmick of the filling mechanism, is absolutely amusing the entire time. Now, I haven't actually sat down to see if I can write 5,000 words with this pen and then it just full stop. I'll let somebody else do that. As a habit, I don't normally post my pens, but some pens need to be posted, and some people prefer to post their pens. This pen posts very easily, no real problems, but it does get quite large. It just feels very large in the hand, standing way out there, and it's not a very deep posting. Doesn't make me feel the most secure. I hold on to the cap. The pen is plenty large enough to use unposted, though you could post it if you wanted to. If you enjoy videos like this, then be sure to hit the subscribe button. Now, the important part, the writing sample. I do find the size of this pen in my hand is very comfortable, and the threads don't make any kind of an issue for me as I'm holding it to write. I do tend to hold it a little bit farther back. The section is not slippery if you do hold it all the way down on the section while you're writing. My fingers tend to be right across on the threads. They're not tight, they're not sharp, they're not uncomfortable. So I don't have any kind of comfort issue. I don't experience any kind of cramping. In general, I find this pen to be incredibly comfortable to use. This, strangely for me, has been an complement color pen that I tend to use. I frequently put an orange or red ink into this pen, and I think I'm drawn to that because of the color of the ink window. That being said, knowing that I have a pen that I use complement colors in is frequently useful. Now, like I said, it's a smooth writing experience, not glassy smooth, but definitely not a lot of feedback. So if you like the feedback of, say, a Platinum 3776, this has less. So it's something to consider. Now, the nibs, as I said, I've replaced the nib on this. And that is, to me, distinctly an advantage in how easily and inexpensive it is to replace the nib. It's simply a screw-in nib unit. And I enjoy when that's the case over friction fit. I've found that the friction fit ones, in time, as you change your nibs, do get loose, which you should expect. I haven't had that issue for the screw-in ones. So back to it writes really well. I know that some people have had issues with Conklin pens. I did have an issue, but it's not an issue that I found anything really negative about or to whine about. Something not being perfect when I get it isn't bad. It just happens, and I move forward from there. In short, I like this pen. Now for something a bit more standard in comparing writing size. I use Mnemosyne Blue to do this. Here it is with a Jowo extra fine on the left, medium in the middle, and a 1.1 stub on the right. We get nothing unexpected in terms of line width from this pen. This fine nib absolutely writes as a fine, and it writes well enough that it does make me wonder about trying out their extra fine to see how that would feel, which would be rather interesting because I expect going from an extra fine to a broad will destroy the usefulness of the gauge itself. So how does this nib compare to other nibs I've used? Looking at the writing of a Conklin word gauge with a fine nib, here it is next to a Noodler's Charlie with what writes like a fine nib, a Lamy All-Star with a fine nib, a Mnemosyne Emperor with a medium fine, a Fountain Pen Revolution with what writes like a medium, and a Pilot Metropolitan with a medium nib. It isn't a pen review without doing some size comparisons. Here it is capped, here it is uncapped, and here it is posted. I would call this pen a little bit larger than some of your more standard pens. It's a little bit longer and a slight bit girthier, and that little bit girthier makes all the difference in comfort in your hand and making sure that you don't have any kind of hand cramping, leaving you with an overall really pleasant writing experience from this pen. Let's clean this pen now that it's dirty. Be sure to check out the next pen review when we take a look at the Parker Jotter. If you want to be able to support not just my channel, but any reviewer, then when you make a purchase, be sure to tell that retailer where you heard about it. Thanks for watching.